Hi, I'm Michael Apple for BizNews.com. It's a pleasure to speak to Connie Mulder. He's the head of the Solidarity Research Institute, the SRI. The Institute has recently released a report titled Fixing South Africa's Electricity Crisis, Ensuring that the Light at the End of the Tunnel is On. Connie, I appreciate that little bit of humor in the title there. Thanks for your time.
No problem, Michael. Nice to be here.
Before we get into the details, broadly speaking, from your research, how bad is the electricity situation we find ourselves in?
Um, well, Michael, although it's bad at the moment, but it's still better than next year. Is the best description that I've got. At the moment, we're sitting with a 46,000 megawatt capacity or generation shortfall. But this is only going to get worse as the time continues. For the simple reason, Eskom needs to decommission several of its coal-fired plants. The average age of a coal-fired plant, excluding Medupi and Kusile, is 41 years. Now, a coal-fired plant generally has a 50-year lifetime. So we're nearing the end of Eskom's almost their whole coal-fired fleet, and we've got nothing in the pipeline to replace it. If you trust government, absolutely nothing. So Eskom needs to decommission 10,500 megawatts of coal-fired generation in the next 8 years, and 22,000 megawatts. That's more than half of their coal-fired plants in the next 13 years. Now, to sort of get the capacity replaced somehow, we've got the integrated resource plan that Minister Mantashe published in 2019. But this plan is a strong word. It's more a work of fiction, which relies on several miracles happening. For example, we're now if we do everything absolutely perfectly. Now, with any government project, that's not a given. Everything absolutely perfectly, and a couple of things happen. The one is the Grand Inga hydroelectrical scheme, which has no funding and hasn't really been constructed, starts exporting electricity magically, although nothing seems to realize. Or if the sun shines 24 hours a day and the wind blows 24 hours a day, then we'll make it. If any of these things do not happen, which seems highly likely that the sun will not shine 24 hours a day, then we are not going to have enough power by 2030. Quite simply, we're not going to have enough power for the next decade, and realistically, we're never going to have enough power if we allow government to try and fix this problem. And I think that's the thing that should bother us as citizens is we've now sat back for 15 years and watched as these guys got stuck in their headlights. They've got absolutely no idea what to do. We can see that with its plan after plan and commission after commission and emergency plan and emergency procurement. I think the thing that should, and it's the most crystallized version of what government's plans are, is in the 2019 plan. Uh, Immediately, there's a 2,000 megawatt shortfall by 2019 already, and then they announced a emergency procurement situation, the RMI PPPP, which is basically meant to procure power from projects that are already finished or very close to finishing. And one of the criterion is they should be able to connect power to the grid by June 2022. Now it is now July 2022. Not a single project of this has actually generated power. This is the car power ships that came here. Not a single one has generated power. Some of them have started construction and will be done in 18 months. So this is government moving as fast as it possibly can. And even in this, tenders are coming. There's a lot of rumors about corruption, about bid preferences, about bid irregularities. So we just simply we can't wait for these guys anymore. It's not going to work. They cannot or will not solve this problem, and that means it's up to us.
So we're going to be scaling back at least 22,000 megawatts when we mothball those coal-fired power stations, as you say.
Yeah.
So 68,000 megawatts of renewable energy is what the plan is. That's according to Andre de Ruyter, with an overall generating capacity of 82,000 roughly megawatts by I think 2035. Do you believe that 68,000 that 82,000 megawatts is inadequate for where we're going to be in terms of our size of our economy and population by over a decade from now?
Yes, no, absolutely. So that is, we need 68,000 megawatts to stay where we are now. That's just to sort of replace what Eskom is decommissioning. If we if we're talking about growth at all, we need a lot more capacity than we have at the moment, honestly. And there is absolutely no way that this is going to happen through large commercial scale projects. That's why it's not adequate to only have 82,000 megawatts, especially because renewables do not have a capacity factor of 80% or 90%. Solar is closer to 30% in good situations, while South Africa has a very good solar resources. So we should be close to 30%, and wind is close to 40%. That's on the renewable side. We're not that we're basically we're much more technologically agnostic regarding this. We don't really care how power gets into the grid. We care that power gets into the grid and that it gets into the grid from decentralized small scale generators, which is the only way we're going to get close to adding 68,000 megawatts in 13 years, and even more. And for that, in the report, we took some inspiration from a weird source. Is we first needed to go and see where are similar problems to South Africa? And that's actually a tough ask in the world for the reason our government is a unique blend of incompetence and ideology. But luckily, we found a similar thing, ideology wise at least, in Vietnam, which had very similar problems in 2007 due to dissimilar reasons. Their economy literally grew too fast for their power network. Our power network didn't grow at all. In fact, it shrank. Their economy grew way too fast, their power network, and they also started experiencing rolling blackouts. Now, Vietnam is one of the last proper communist countries. There's only one legal party, it's the Communist Party of Vietnam. They control everything. Everything is state owned, including Electricity of Vietnam, the state owned monopoly on power generation, which failed to generate enough power at the end of 2007, which sounds eerily similar. But ultimately, in Vietnam, pragmatism trumped ideology. And by 2011, they allowed the wholesale trading of power, but it wasn't enough. And then 2017, they went for a radical intervention, which is they announced a generous feed-in tariff. But the conditions were quite simple. It was announced June 2017, and you had to have solar power connected to the grid and supplying power by June 2018 to qualify for this tariff. Now, this put a stopwatch on construction, and the effects were remarkable. Within 1 year, they added 4,500 megawatt of solar generation capacity. They then revised this tariff in 2019. By December 2019, they announced a new one with a specific focus on rooftop solar, and once again said 1 year, by December 2020, you need to be supplying power to the grid, then you qualify for the tariff. And they added in 2019, 2020, they added 9,000 megawatts of solar capacity in 1 year, of which 6,000 megawatt was added in 1 month in December 2020 to get to the tariff. So it is possible. Vietnam is a much poorer country than South Africa, and it does not nearly have the solar or wind resources that we have. Most of their power is hydro based. So we can honestly we can do this with one signature if we just go this way. Feed-in tariffs aren't a new thing. It's more than 100 countries in the world have used it to get renewable energies into the grid. We can very easily solve this. But the one thing that is outstanding, and that's the one thing that several studies, I read 4 or 5 studies that sort of studied this Vietnam miracle, and the factor that they said was critical was plain and simply political will. The political will existed to solve this problem. In South Africa, after 15 years, we need to face the facts and look in the mirror. The political will does not exist here to solve, load shedding, at least not from the ANC. And that means we need to go and find that political will somewhere else. And that's where we are coming in and saying, but we've got the political will to solve this. We've got the will to solve this, of course. We don't want to be stuck in the dark with an economy that's going back to the Middle Ages. And that is why we've now announced we think a feed-in tariff is the right thing, but if government doesn't announce it, which we think they're going to get stuck on giving tenders to their comrades with IPPs, we're much rather going to say we're just going to start entering the generation space and selling space when we urge people to do the same. It's the only way out of this. If we wait for government, we're going to be waiting a long, long time.
In fact, what happened in Vietnam, and you made the point in your report, is the policy was too successful with infrastructure being overloaded. That's unthinkable. When a policy is too successful, when's the last time there was a policy in South Africa that was too successful, Connie?
It depends on how you define success, but yes, exactly. So there are technical issues with having that, but South Africa is not really at risk for the simple reason we had a grid that could supply a lot more power than it does at the moment, and that means we're in no way in risk of overloading the grid until we get back to like 2011, 2012 levels of generation. And that's why we will have technical issues. The other thing is it's not necessarily a cheap solution, but there are no cheap solutions left to ending load shedding. And the only thing more expensive than fixing load shedding is not fixing load shedding. So it's sort of this catch 22. If we did the right things and built power stations in 20 years ago, yes, then we would have had a cheap way out of it. But we're here now. We've been digging a hole for 15 years, and now we need to start building a ladder. And every year that we don't build a ladder, it gets more expensive to get out of this hole.
So, from your report, it says, quote, the South African labour market is facing the reality of permanent load shedding if we rely on the government alone to head off the energy crisis. And this is where you're saying flood the department, flood with IPPs. This is where IPPs have to come in, and Solidarity has created, is it Canton that's going to form part of this?
Yes, so it's not only IPPs. We're not only calling on commercial projects even. We're saying every school, every mall, every farmer apply for a permit to distribute and sell power and flood NERSA so that we can flood open these bottlenecks. Approving 16 projects of less than 10 megawatts a month is not going to solve this at all. We need hundreds of thousands of small-scale generators. And we've got a property development company, Canton, which built Soltec, and we're going through them. We're saying, but we're going into the power generation space as a trade union. It's literally the best thing we can do for our members to try and ensure electricity stability. And the only way to do that at the moment is to get involved in generation to make sure that we go through the process. And obviously, we're looking at if anything is unduly burdensome or doesn't make sense or it's irrational. We've got a long history of successful litigation, and that is we're going through this process to start generating power, selling it because of just plain simply it's necessary. But if we get hit by any bottlenecks that can be solved with litigation, we're going to be on that as quickly as possible to sort of plow open the way and make sure that we've got this floodgate of small scale generation, which is the only way that we're going to solve this problem. We've gone through all the large commercial project options. They're 10, 15 years away at most. And we cannot sit in stage 4 now, with stage 6 being anomalous, and then stage 6 becoming the norm, and stage 8 being anomalous, and then at some point having power would be the anomaly. And we cannot be there because in that scenario, ultimately, the harsh reality is South Africa will have enough energy for its economic demands, but it will not be because we're generating more energy. It will be because the economic demands have dropped to Stone Age levels, and that's a deindustrialization of a country, and no one wants that. No one wants that level of poverty and starvation, which is what we're looking at.
So every South African wants to know how long this is going to go on for. You've made the point that, stage 4 has become quite normal. Stage 6, you say, will become the normal in the next 5 years, with more extreme stages becoming the extreme if the current trend continues. That's worrying.
Yes. Yes, and that should be worrying. If we do nothing, then quite frankly, a couple of years back, stage 4 was almost unthinkable. It was no, okay, stage 2 at worst. Now we're in a situation where stage 2 is the go-to. If something breaks, we're at stage 2, and stage 4 is now rapidly becoming something that we're grateful for, which is absurd. Is that we're grateful? It's only power is only of 4 hours a day. That is complete madness. If if we take the right decisions, and that is where the ball gets passed to government, is if we make the right decisions. If we look at Vietnam's example, we've got more capital. We're a much richer country. We've got more expertise. Vietnam had to import some of our skills. Some of the guys who worked at ESCOM went to Vietnam to solve their problems. We've got the skills. If we make the right decisions, we can realistically get load shedding down by almost 97, 98% in a year. Um,
Mm.
that's the absurdity. Is we're sitting on the solution and we're refusing to do it. If we really start getting a small scale power generation sector that explodes, that's creating hundreds of thousands of jobs directly and millions indirectly, because suddenly we've got an economy that is energy stability. At the moment, it's the number one factor that's holding back South Africa. I think in the report you'll see as well, our GDP per capita in dollar terms has stagnated in the last 10 years. We've gone nowhere. for the simple reason we haven't got power. And if you don't have power, Africa is exploding, but South Africa is not. We're lagging behind, and we're going to be left behind if we don't get energy stability as quickly as possible. So if we actually solve the energy problem, which we think is solved on the rooftops of hundreds of thousands of South Africans, not in the corridors of large commercial projects, the potential is really unlimited. And that's why, a last point, we're also really reskilling and almost repurposing our educational institutions. So we've got Soltech with vocational training and academia, which does more university training. But they're looking at an energy engineering degree, and we're going with Soltech to say, but we need to get experts in renewable energy, people who can design, implement, maintain renewable energy small-scale solutions. And we're going to repurpose to try and get the skills deficit even further, to get these people into a new sector. That is, if you look at South Africa, it's one of the biggest supply-demand discrepancies that you've got. It has to explode. With or without government, this is going to happen. And we're seeing that already with inverter sales off the charts, solar panels, macro selling whole solar installations at the moment. Government is going to either stand in the way, and then South Africa is just going to go through them and solve this problem, or they're going to try and control it, and then we're going to have to go around them to solve this problem. But I think they've done their number, they've danced their dance, and they've sung their song, and it's now time for government to relinquish control of this and say, we'll incentivize solar solutions or renewable solutions, but we're going to just radically decentralize power generation and allow citizens everywhere to solve this problem.
Incentivizing a handsome feed-in tariff. What's the status quo regarding that at the moment?
So the irony is we've got a feed-in tariff regulation that NERSA approved in 2007, but they never used because they rather chose the bid windows for IPPs. And government's own modeling shows, number one, that the bid windows with limited capacity is not, number one, the most cost-efficient way, or secondly, the best way to add enough capacity, yet for political reasons, they still chose to limit the builds. So the number one thing, I think the one thing that we're calling on is scrapping the limits on building. Why only 2,600 megawatts at a time? Secondly, a feed-in tariff would then be, municipalities can do that if they want to. It's quite simply just guaranteeing an investor in a renewable energy project or a small-scale project a return within 5 or 10 years. So you're incentivizing through adding capacity, saying, if you build a wind farm or a solar farm, we will buy your electricity guaranteed for the first 5 years or 10 years. There's no hard stop on how long. In Vietnam, it was 20 years because they really wanted to add capacity. And that means you'll have your money back within 10 years. Now, this is something that's almost a win-win situation in South Africa, for the simple reason, if you can say, a lot of people would say, we want to put on solar, but it's too expensive. So if you can say, well, if you give us the capacity, we will basically, we'll pay for your solar. In over 10 years' time, you can't get the credit, but we can basically extend it to you through a feed-in tariff. You will get a return. You'll be adding capacity. You'll be removing yourself from the grid, which means Eskom can breathe a sigh of relief and do some much-needed maintenance. Everybody wins in this situation. And if we can get that going, we'll at least have power during the day, most definitely when the industry is run, which means economic growth going up to 3-4%, since we still need to rebound from our COVID recession. It's almost unthinkable that we haven't done this already. We rather chose, but well, we understand why. There's a lot more control in having a bid window where you can say all IPPs need to be 41% black owned and need to be for 51% local procurement. With this decentralization, you'll have no control over who's generating the power. But South Africa is at a point where I don't think we care who generates the power. We need electrons in the system. We don't necessarily care who's doing it. The damage done is too severe to keep on focusing on who's doing it and who's benefiting. We know who's not benefiting, and that is the whole economy.
President Ramaphosa yesterday wrote in his newsletter that he's going to be making some big announcement regarding concrete set of plans to deal with it. I assume you're not holding your breath.
Michael, I will most likely be attending that news conference in the smart city that he built 2 years ago, if you remember correctly, with monorails and all of these wonderful
the bullet
things.
trains, yeah.
the bullet trains that were coming. We've had enough announcements and enough plans from government that just plain simply don't work. What's bothering us is I think he's going to go in the direction of saying we're an energy emergency. Why? They've already got all the power. They've been sitting on that power for 15 years. They've got all the decision-making powers that they need to solve the problem. Giving more power to government is not going to solve this. The only thing that might happen is we'll in some obscure way of logic find out that smoking cigarettes causes load shedding and once again ban cigarettes. That is the thing that we're worried about. There's absolutely no reason for government to give itself more power to solve this. We're of the opinion government is stuck on the train tracks, stuck in the headlights, and they're holding us to make sure the train hits us all. Just let us go. If they want to get hit by the train, they're welcome, but we do not want to stay on the tracks any longer. Having more government is not going to solve this. It's going to lead to more Madupis, more Kusiles, more massive corruption scandals. We say less government is the way. If the thing he announces is that NOSA will change the registration process to a simple online portal, that's wonderful because that's what it should have been from the very start. And then radically decentralize. If anything else that says, well, we're going to have another commission that gives a plan to another planning committee that once again consults for another 2-3 years, and then we add 150 megawatts of emergency power to address a 6,000 megawatt shortfall. We're going to be playing musical chairs like this with committees for a very long time. We're not holding our breath for the simple reason I don't think government can solve this. I don't think they're capable of solving it. And the last 15 years of not solving it, when it's actually a very relatively straightforward solution, should tell you they just can't do it. And they won't do it because I don't think they want to.
Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan even famously said, cut the bloody red tape. Have they cut the red tape enough?
Um, they've tried. They've tried. One of the things that happened that was quite good is actually the 100 megawatt self-generation limit that was lifted so that you can sell. But the problem is then, if you look at the process to apply, it's still like you're applying for a license. Now, this should be registration. It should be, I'm going to generate power, here is where I'm at, and it should be for database purposes. And it has not been done. That process should be finished within 2 weeks, if that much. It should actually be an online portal. The Yet Busa is saying it takes almost 300 days for someone to get a registration permit. Now, this is not cutting the red tape at all. That is entombing people in red tape. It's unfathomable from a perspective of we want energy critically why you would have this, but it unfortunately makes sense if there are vested interests in maintaining the status quo as much as possible. And that is what I think bothers us is there's just not enough action. There should be a simple fix saying it's an online portal, register, force Eskom, say you need to add these projects within 90 days. Eskom, I know, is creating capacity to be able to do that. And suddenly it becomes very attractive for entrepreneurs because you're looking at a massive demand with not nearly enough supply, and you can go into that space and very quickly get yourself a project that's up and running and selling to the people. Yet if it takes 300 days and you have to first get clients, get price purchase agreements before you can start construction, there's a whole lot of really onerous regulation still, which doesn't make a lot of sense for a crisis that we're in. And I would say no, they've added red tape. They've not necessarily cut it.
Well, the rater seems to think that there is progress, saying that the grid access protocols have been reduced from 210 days to 105. You're saying cut that even more.
Yes, that's on Eskom's side. So we've seen that Eskom is creating capacity to add people to the grid. That should ideally be like 90 days. If we can get from the moment that I say I want to sell, I've got a permit, it takes 90 days, 3 months, then I'm selling. That's it. Should less is better, but there are technical constraints to actually getting connected to the grid. Eskom has done their part. The problem is this: they're waiting for applicants because NERSA's allowing 16 people a month, and they're proud of it. That's the absurdity. So we're not going to bash it. It's good. 16 is more than zero, but we need 68,000 megawatts of energy added to stay where we are. We cannot be applying allowing 16 projects of 10 megawatts or less per month and think that we're going to make it. There's no chance. We need to be just plain simply approving hundreds of thousands of projects and getting that through. So there's still a large bottleneck there, and that's why if we're going into this space and we're asking other people to get into this space, that hopefully will force open this bottleneck and just finally free South Africa from the shackles of load shedding.
I'll end off with a quote from your report. South Africa is generating less electricity per annum than in 2012, with more people and a bigger economy in rand terms. Connie Mulder, thanks for your time.